This is A Story of Sorts, the podcast mostly about bookish stuff. Hello everyone, Karina here. On this episode, I chat with Julia Rittenberg about graphic novels, fandom, and her work as a freelance writer. Have a listen. Hello Julia, welcome to A Story of Sorts.
Thank you for having me.
Would you like to start off by introducing yourself?
Yeah, my name is Julia Rittenberg. I'm a freelance writer based in Brooklyn, New York. I started freelance writing in earnest about a year ago because I was working for a large-scale events company when the pandemic shut everything down. So obviously that didn't work out. But then I had been writing for Book Riot for a couple of years at that point, and then I just started like picking up more reviewing gigs and more like random writing jobs. And so now that's what I do.
Do you want to tell us first your story as a reader? When and how did you first start reading?
Yeah, of course. My parents were always both big readers. My mom is actually a literary agent, so she works with like mystery and crime writers. So she wasn't reading us those books when we were young, but she and my dad both read us a lot of books while we were growing up. And then the first sort of chapter books that I started reading on my own and like, you know, picking up from the library and getting through all of them were the Junie Jones books. Which those are about like a pre-K and then kindergartner who's very like loud and opinionated. So I really related to her. And then after that, I got really into the Ramona and Beezus like and sort of adjacent characters book series by Beverly Cleary. I was also a big fan of Ellen Teppets by Beverly Cleary. I read that a bunch of times. So I really got into reading books because I read so many books where like the main characters were like opinionated and a little bit odd. And then my other favorite book series from that age was like everything by Gail Carson Levine. She wrote these like wonderful, like, you know, sort of modern takes on fairy tales and then also just like rewritten fairy tales. So they were like a little bit, you know, more satirical and odd. So I really related to that when I was younger and like sort of understood what Cinderella was about, but also like didn't love it. So someone sort of making fun of it was really appealing to me.
And was that, did you start, how old were you, more or less? Like, was it immediately when you started, as soon as you were able to start reading, that you also started?
Yeah, I think I was around 6 when I started like feeling comfortable reading alone more often. My parents still like read to me and my twin sister a lot. And we also we listened to a lot of audiobooks on like CDs and cassette tapes in the car. So that also helped me with reading just because I started learning more words. But yeah, by the time I was 7, I was kind of just reading all the time. So
that is so curious to hear someone talk about, because I don't know how old you are. I'm guessing I'm 34. I'm guessing you're maybe younger than me. And
yeah, I'm 27.
Yeah, I kind of figured. And it's so curious to see someone talking about listening to audiobooks as a child. Because for me, it's something that I started doing as an adult, but it's also quite recent that I started hearing people talk about audiobooks and stuff. So that is just so interesting.
Yeah, we had a lot of like CD collections. And then so I had like my own like CD, like portable CD player and, you know, a booklet full of CDs because I also used to listen to audiobooks to fall asleep. And specifically like Harry Potter put me right to sleep. I was a really big fan when I was younger. And that was just really helpful because I was an anxious kid too. So like listening to the same story over and over was very good for just conking out at night. And so I did that until I was a teenager, basically. But then, you know, when I was a teenager, people weren't listening to CDs anymore. It was all about like iPods and stuff. So things like started to change, like with the way people were engaging with like music and audiobooks around the same time as I was like, oh, I don't need to fall asleep to an audiobook anymore, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, but you were kind of picking up on audiobooks, but as they say, before it was cool. That's really curious.
My parents also like listened to PG Woodhouse and everything on audiobooks. And we had all those Nancy Drew collections. Yeah. They were actually read by Laura Linney, you know, she's a great American actress. Yeah. And then I believe Stockard Channing was the actress who read the Ramona books on like literally on cassette tapes.
Yeah. So. That is
Yeah.
really cool. So cool. I'd never had, like I said, this conversation with someone who started reading from their parents and so young. So when I see now a CD that's an audiobook, sometimes in small libraries and stuff, it's really cool.
Yeah.
What about your writing journey? How did it start?
So I went to like a very writing heavy prep school in New York. I grew up in Brooklyn. So anyone who sort of went to school around here and went to like a private school or an independent school like I did would, you know, spend a lot of time like writing and doing academic stuff and sort of targeted towards being prepped for like college and university. So there, I was constantly doing essays and everything. And then they did have like a fair amount of creative writing projects, but I got more into like creative writing and other forms of writing because I went to a teen writing workshop at the local Barnes and Noble that was actually run by the author Ned Vizzini. He was a popular young adult author in America. He unfortunately took his own life several years ago, but he still resonates with like a lot of teenagers, especially in New York, because he wrote a lot about growing up in Brooklyn, which is kind of a strange experience in America. So I went to those writing workshops, you know, gained a little bit more confidence in like writing fiction. But in college, I just sort of like went away from like the whole fiction or personal essay writing game because I was just writing like essays for like anthropology, social sciences, humanities class all the time. I was an international studies major, so I took like a million different classes because they were like, well, as long as it's internationally based, it counts. And I was like, oh, cool. It's like not picking a major, which I didn't want to do. So that was amazing. And then in graduate school, I did media studies. So that was like a lot of like critical theory, you know, technology, social sciences based writing. And then it was after graduate school that I started like writing on the internet in a more casual, fun, accessible way. And I like that a lot better than academic writing.
So you started also as a teenager then to kind of give your first steps writing, or did you always like to write, like maybe a diary or?
Yeah, no, I had diaries. I was bad at keeping like personal diaries because I like didn't find myself very interesting.
Oh.
But I did enjoy writing stories on the family computer because I liked all of the different fonts you could choose in Microsoft Word.
Oh, yes, that was a thing.
Yeah, so I remember sort of just writing like lots of stories and being like, oh, this is a cool like curly, you know, cursive font for like a story about like a princess or something. So that was something fun that I would do once in a while. But like I don't think I really gained confidence in sharing my writing until I was older.
Okay. And then you started working then as a freelancer was it after college?
So after college I was an English teaching assistant for a year. And then I went to graduate school. Then I started freelance writing for Book Riot. And I was working some different, like, you know, normal office jobs for a few years. And then the pandemic happened. And then that's when like freelance writing became like my main gig.
So you kind of decided, this is maybe the way to go because, we're all also home. So it's something that I can do at home.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking for other full-time jobs. I don't know how it was in Holland, but like the unemployment crisis in America was really, really bad.
Yeah.
And so it was just simply a lot easier to get someone to pay me to write for like, you know, on a part-time like freelance basis than it was to get anyone interested in hiring me because Americans, like, we get our health insurance through our employers usually. So sometimes when I'm like applying for jobs, I feel like they're looking at me like, is this person worth like paying? Is it worth to help pay their medical bills?
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
like it's really sad and I don't like it. So, but then the freelance writing thing was like, well, you know, a lot of places need content. I am not shy about contacting anybody to do anything. Basically, like I would reach out to places where I'm like, so I don't really know anything about this, but I do write stuff. And I think they were just like, oh, well, you write, which is good. You know, we just need someone to write. Like, so like having very little fear because I've like done so many random jobs in my life was like the right call for gaining like freelance writing stuff. Yeah. So it was, and you're exactly right. I was like, well, I can do this from home. No one expects me to go into an office. And honestly, no one expects me to get dressed for the day and get on a video call. They just expect me to like send, prepared articles that they don't
Yeah,
have to edit that much.
of
So,
course. Yeah,
yeah.
that's really cool because I do find sometimes a bit difficult to go into the freelancing life, but we are going to get into that a little later.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about growing up in Brooklyn because you just mentioned it?
Yeah, sure. Growing up in Brooklyn is like a little bit strange, and I only think it's strange because when I would go to like other parts of the country or like other states in the US, other kids would ask if I had been to like such and such chain restaurant or something, and I would say, no, I've never heard of it before because I didn't grow up in a neighborhood where there's a lot of chain restaurants because it was an urban environment. But then if you go to the suburbs in the US, like, even right outside of New York City, it's pretty much all like chain restaurants and stuff like that. So like I had never been to a Walmart until I was in college. That's a big American thing. I'm not super familiar with malls, although I know a lot of people like enjoy them. Um, and I bought a lot of thrifted clothes. Well, first of all, I didn't really fit like a lot of the popular like clothing styles at the time,
Yeah.
so I would just like buy thrifted clothes and be like, well, this like oversized 90s look just is more comfortable anyway.
Yeah.
So, but like I didn't take the subway alone until I was more like a, preteen. And then, I would sort of I wasn't like a wild punk child. I pretty much just went to bookstores and stuff if I wanted to go somewhere. And then my friends and I would like go to concerts together, and one of our parents would like meet us at the concert space afterwards and then like shepherd us all home to Brooklyn. Now it's like a place that a lot of people want to live. It's really cool. There's so many writers here. Everyone lives in Bushwick. But when I was growing up, it was truly like, oh, that's like a part of the city that no one cares about.
Oh,
Um,
really?
yeah, because Manhattan was where everything was happening.
Mm-hmm.
But then like more because so many people couldn't afford to live in Manhattan, so many people started moving to Brooklyn.
Yeah.
So they started opening up like comedy clubs and music venues and stuff in Brooklyn. So then you didn't have to leave Brooklyn to do something fun.
Yeah.
And now like people come to Brooklyn to do things as opposed to like always going to Manhattan. And it's the same with Queens. Like New York City's made up of 5 boroughs. I'm sure you're familiar.
Like I know a little bit about it, but like the other day actually I felt a bit because I asked someone, oh, and do you have the sea in Chicago? And then I actually went to check where Chicago is because I wasn't sure. And I was like, oh my God, people who are actually listening in the States must think, what is she asking? What's she talking about? So, but I did have this idea that Brooklyn was quite a busy and big town. So that's quite surprising too. I did not know that there had been that shift. I thought it had always been like that.
Yeah, it's sort of like so I'm sure you've heard of like Harlem and the Harlem Renaissance authors before.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't used to be a very popular neighborhood either, but then it's sort of like, oh, like all of these places are really cheap to live. So it is a gentrification thing,
Mm-hmm.
like people who can't afford to, who are, maybe white and privileged or privileged in some way, like can't afford to live in the very center of town. So they like go further uptown or they go to Brooklyn, but then they sort of push out the people who've been living there for such a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Brooklyn's like crazy busy. There's so much construction and development here all the time. A lot of like local community people are, constantly angry about it because they're like tearing down like historical buildings to like build new high-rise apartment buildings. So there is a lot of like, hangups.
Yeah.
Like being like a person who still lives in Brooklyn and seeing it change so much around me. It was kind of funny because everyone kept talking about how Manhattan was like so empty during the pandemic, but Brooklyn just as busy as ever. Like everybody, like people who live in Brooklyn, like they don't have second homes to go to. Like,
Yeah.
and there's so many like apartment buildings in Manhattan where like rich people just own this apartment to go to sometimes. So of course they weren't coming during the pandemic. But yeah, now it's kind of funny because like every summer in New York, like every weekend, the city feels empty because everyone just travels.
Mm-hmm.
But then last summer, like everyone was here all the time. And I was like, I need a break from all of these New Yorkers. God.
Because you used to have like a space during the year where it was quieter, and last year not anymore.
Yeah. So I'm hoping this summer that at least people will start going on weekend trips again.
Yeah. Going back to the writing, what do you find the most challenging, writing for yourself or writing for others?
I find writing for myself, working on like personal essay projects or even like fiction projects that feel really personal to me because it's my idea, so difficult. Like when something's targeted for like publication and I'm like, oh, I'm working on this because it's for a website that I write for, I have a very easy time with that. But when I have like an idea of something that I want to explore in writing personally, I find it just so hard because it feels more vulnerable to me. When I'm doing something for work, it doesn't feel as intense. But when I'm like writing a personal essay about growing up or like my feelings about like fiction, fantasy or something, it gets really hard.
You don't find it difficult to meet the client where they want? I'm asking this, I'm sorry, this is maybe a bit of, I'm bringing my personal insecurities, but I worked as a freelance writer for a website for a while, and I had like, there were different clients, and sometimes I found it so hard to find the voice that the client wanted.
I think I have an easier time meeting the client where they are because it doesn't feel like a reflection on my writing.
Okay.
If someone reads a personal essay that I wrote and really lays into it, or like a piece of fiction,
yeah,
it feels like a much more intense reflection on who I am. Whereas when I was just working on a piece about like, how to use proxies to gather financial data. And if someone's like, this isn't really like on voice for our tech website, I'm like, well, I don't care about using proxies anyway, so I'll just rewrite it. So it feels less emotionally charged to pretend to be someone else. I think that's why I really enjoyed doing improv comedy for so many years, because I was like, well, if I flop on stage, at least I'm not speaking from the heart. I'm just being funny. I'm being silly. I'm being embarrassing. It doesn't matter though, personally to me.
There isn't as much at stake then.
Yeah.
And yeah, because rewriting something for someone and going to what they want can be a bit complicated. Maybe you have like to, I don't know, maybe your experience is different, but having to go back and rewrite what you already wrote and you thought it was delivered can be a bit challenging, no?
It is challenging. I don't like working with clients who aren't specific about what they want. So a lot of the places that I write for money have really intense style guides and like just working on regular content that's pretty much always the same. Because if you're a freelance writer who's like pitching yourself to editors for like writing about pop culture or sort of, interpreting the news, or interpreting like large scale political events, that's a bit harder for me to like push myself to do because it's a lot of thinking. It's a lot of like reading. You want to be informed. You want it to be correct. But so when I do stuff that's like, blog content for tech companies or for, marketing companies, it's a little easier because they know what they want and they know how they want it to look. And they'll probably be like a little bit heavier with the edit button, basically. So that I do find it difficult, like trying to please someone with a piece of cultural commentary, because editors can be really persnickety about like the sources that you use and the way you talk about them and the way you present them. But stuff that's just, regular blog content for like a tech company is not as hard. And I really love, like, I work with this one tech company where like my editor always tells me what he liked about my piece, which is so nice of him because I'm like, I'm basically writing you the same thing every week and you always manage to say something very kind. So
that is super nice. And you also get the feedback of the things you can continue to do.
Yes. And then it's also like, and change this sentence because it's inaccurate. And I'm like, oh, cool. I don't know about computer science anyway. So that makes sense that it's inaccurate. you know?
Yeah, because research, yeah, you can always do research, but it's always going to need an editor to make sure the
Yeah.
research is right.
Yeah, to make sure I'm interpreting it correctly.
What do you think is more rewarding? The writing for yourself or the writing for others?
So even though it's more challenging, I do think like writing for myself is more rewarding, especially when I work on like a personal like essay or piece of fiction that a lot of people connect to, or even one person. If one person's like, I liked this sentence, I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like they love everything I've ever done. But yeah, so like last summer, you know, during a different portion of the pandemic, I was taking an online writing class and I read my final piece to the class. And in the Zoom chat, a lot of people were writing like, oh, I relate to this so much. Like, I also feel really lonely a lot of the time. So, because my piece was about being lonely. So when people like connect to something that I've written about my personal life, or it's a big personal project that I've been working on, that's so rewarding, even though I don't want to sit down and do it unless someone tells me to.
Because I think maybe that's the tougher part, to actually find the time within the day to write for yourself. Because it's one thing if you're being paid, like it's a job, you know, you have to do it.
Yeah.
But doing it for yourself, it's something else.
Mm-hmm.
You're a content writer and also a book reviewer. Of all the things you do, writing-wise, what do you like the most and what do you find the most difficult?
Yeah, I really like the term content writer because I feel like it can just mean anything. Like everyone wants like blog content, news content, wellness, whatever. So that's been really fun because I never expected that I would like write for so many random businesses. Like I write for a men's clothing website. I write blogs for them. And they were like, oh, we're interested in a woman's perspective on styling. And I was like, you did not pick a very fashionable woman, but I'm excited to do this for you. And so I just learned so many things that I wouldn't have expected to know about at this point in my life. Again, I said I'm not a computer scientist, but I write like technical content for like blogs that are targeted to like helping people, you know, use computers better. And I was like, I never even knew that there were differences between IP addresses, but there's a lot of different kinds. You know, someone might tell me I'm wrong. There's not a lot, but there are some, whatever.
I won't correct you on that because I have no idea.
Yeah, but so the fact that I like, you know, really pushed myself outside my comfort zone was like has been really enlightening as a writer. And then for book reviewing, that's just fun because I read a lot of books that I wouldn't have picked up on my own. And also now, like, I'm sure that you like have seen, you know, trolled around NetGalley Edelweiss once in a while. And you're just like, oh, that looks cool. And then you get approved for it because the publisher like thinks you're special because you review and write about books for Book Riot. And you're like, yeah, I'm super important. Give me all the books.
I got like 20 books that I should have reviewed because they are advanced reading copies, but they are out. But I'm going to request just one more.
Yeah, I don't even look at my Kindle queue. I just like leave it on the book that I'm currently reading.
I really have a problem with that, with not, with kind of stopping myself from requesting because there are so many exciting stories that you see and you want to read. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so once in a while I'll like request a book that I do want to read, but like there's a book coming out from the same publisher like next year that I really want to read.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, I'll read this one and I'll try to find something nice to say about it. So they'll definitely give me the one that I really want.
Yeah. I always kind of rush going to the website as soon as I read a book. I'm kind of like, okay, now I have to post a review because my stats got to be good and I really want to read those books. So I immediately rush to them to leave a review.
And I'll like forget what I thought next week if I don't write a review immediately.
Exactly.
So the book reviewing has been really fun because I've been a reader for a really long time. And obviously I have a lot of opinions about what makes a good book, and my mom has a lot of opinions about what makes a good book because she's a literary agent. so I have been sort of, immersed in like the publishing world since I was young. And it is just, it's a business more than anything else, but it is a business where a lot of the people involved really care about good writing. So that's been fun to like flex those muscles. And there's nothing I feel worse about than when I didn't like a book that I have to review.
Yeah.
And I really have to take a step back and be like, why didn't this book work for me? Like, what is not clicking? And if it's something like, I have like personal things about like body horror, I don't like reading it, but a lot of people do. So I'm like, well, if I didn't like this book that's very much about body horror, that doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that it doesn't work for me,
Yeah, because I also have the feeling that somehow it is easier to write a review for a book you didn't like than for a book you liked, because a book you didn't like, you find a lot of reasons not to like it, but a book you liked, basically you're just like, I just adored it.
Yeah, I'm like, this is just the best book of all time that everyone should read.
Yeah, but it's also so difficult, not difficult, but I guess that when you write a bad review, you have to, not a bad review, sorry, a review about a book that you didn't enjoy as much, you really have to train yourself in a sense, or stop yourself from being mean towards the book as well, because that's, I mean, I don't think anybody likes to put a review when it's like, yeah, I just didn't really like this book. It's just so sad sometimes.
Yeah, I had to give us like a somewhat negative review for a book that I read for book list, but like their policy is also don't review a book that you can find nothing good to say about. Okay. So it was a graphic novel, and I was like, well, I actually think the art is really good. I just think the story is pretty flat. Mm-hmm. And so I had to find a way to say that without like saying like that I thought it was straight up bad. I just thought like, they had like bigger ambitions than they were able to land with the storytelling, which happens to me all the time when I'm writing. And I can't like, sometimes I look at sentences I've written and I'm like, I was trying something there that just didn't work, But it is kind of odd. I don't know if you're on Twitter very often, but like writer Twitter can be a little bit like, I try to avoid looking at what writers think of their reviews. There was, controversy about that recently.
Yeah. But don't tag authors.
Yeah, don't tag authors. And also like, I know that.
Oh, yes. Authors, please stay out of reviews. Like, just stay out of reviews. Just, see them if you want, or have a friend kind of, checking them for you to tell you just the good ones, but stay out of the way of reviewers. I know exactly what you're talking about. Like, for once, I know what's going on, because usually I go on Twitter. I don't know if that happens to you. I go on Twitter and I follow a lot of book accounts. So usually the drama that I see there is related to the publishing industry. And as soon, like, I go on Twitter and I don't understand anything that's going on, because I only see people talking about things.
I'm always 10 steps removed from whatever happened. And I'm like, oh man, people seem really angry.
But like, explain, please. Can someone just tweet something that explains the situation so I don't have to go ask around? Because it's like, I don't want to be involved in the drama, but I love knowing it.
Yeah. Oh, God, same.
This one, I think I know exactly. I mean, I'm pretty certain that this time was so big about the reviews that I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I did. And before that, I did also see like, writers on Twitter being like, oh, all reviews should be good because writing a book is hard. And I was like, well, it's hard, but that doesn't mean it's perfect. And that's not a bad thing, because if you're a professional writer with a contract, maybe you'll get another book. I don't, know, like I agree that writing books is hard, but I think reviewing is difficult too, because I don't want to like, I'm never going to write a review where I'm just hammering on someone.
Yeah, of course.
And so trying to like find a way to be really judicious in my criticism is difficult. And I'm not saying that writers have to be happy if they receive like a less than positive review, but I am saying it's part of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
So, and it's going to be okay. It like, ultimately it doesn't kill you,
No.
It's just a bad day. But I also get a lot of, I went, in graduate school, you get a lot of negative reviews of your writing, or I did. Maybe not everyone. Maybe it's just me. But
No.
but like that's part of it, where I was like, I got like very sort of toughened, and college, I got really toughened to that really quickly, because I was like, some people just don't like the way that I write or talk or speak or exist.
It is hard to not take it personally, to kind of be objective. This is about my writing, that is not going to be good for everyone, because
Yeah.
you see that yourself with books. When you read a book, of course, that it works for someone and it didn't work for you. But I do remember, for example, reading Stephen King, and he was talking about the rejections that he had, and I found it very funny that he was really going like against critics. And I was thinking, wow, you really have to have a lot of trust in yourself as a writer to actually see or say that the critics are just jealous of your writing and that's why they're criticizing you. Because I think if someone says something bad about my like a book that I write, of course you would be upset for the review itself. But to get to the point in which you think, no, I'm too good, so this criticism cannot be.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. My twin sister's an actor, and like I think it's similar for writers in that you do have to have a single-minded like drive to pursue this creative field, because there's so much rejection. I think as an author, as a professional author who has a book coming out, you have to have a group chat where you can talk about how angry you are, but it should be private.
Yeah.
That's it. I have group chats where I trash, a lot of people that I do not put on the internet.
Yeah.
If someone's hacking my text messages, I'm screwed. But no one is right now, because I'm not very important. So
yeah, because sometimes you need to vent, but you also have to do that from a distance. Like, I know this is, maybe I shouldn't be venting, but I need to do this for my own sanity, so I'm gonna do it.
Yeah, and I think that I encourage venting, but I don't encourage venting on Twitter, because it's public.
And it's curious because we were talking about the drama on Twitter, but now people who have no idea what happened
Yeah.
will not know what we're talking about. But no, it's okay.
Yeah, like the furthest I want to explain it is people on Twitter get angry.
Yes.
And full stop. That's it.
So what do you think makes a good review?
I think being able to find like a small plot point or a piece of the book and turning it into like a sort of representative moment of what you liked about the book are the reviews that I always like. So when like the lead of a review is like, even if in a film review or something describes a certain scene that worked really well or didn't work, and explaining sort of why it's like maybe representative of the rest of the movie. And that's a critic's interpretation, obviously. It's not the creator's interpretation. But I think also like being forced to write really short reviews has made me like better at reviewing things overall, because I'm naturally like a wordy, chatty person. So some of the reviews I write have to be like less than 200 words.
Okay.
And that makes you a better reviewer, because you have to distill what you liked or didn't like about a book to essentially one sentence.
Yeah. So. Do you take a lot of notes when you're reading the book, like to make a good review? Do you like across as you are reading, do you take a lot of notes?
I have to take notes just to remember things and sort of organize my thoughts, or actually just encourage myself to have thoughts. So even if I'm not writing like an active, like this was good or this was bad thing in my notes, and I'm just writing like plot summary notes, it helps me think about what I'm liking, because the plot points that I will note are probably things that struck me in a good or a bad way. So when I'm like getting to the actual review writing process, I'm like, oh, I noticed something in that portion. Maybe I liked it, maybe I didn't. But it's helping me think through like what I'm going to write. So I always have to take notes. I can't just remember things. I need to write them down. I used to take longhand notes for everything, but that doesn't now I'm a little lazier. So I do I do typing.
Okay, I'm asking us in like sort of tips because that's something that I'm terrible at. Reviewing is just because if I love a book, I just want to say I really love it, but I can't explain most of the times what. Especially because I don't take a lot of notes as I'm reading. So just wanted like a.
Yeah, I mean, so now that like so many of the review book copies I get for books are like e-galleys or like PDFs and stuff, I kind of have to take notes because I'm not really good at focusing when I'm reading on my computer or on my Kindle. So that's become like more of a necessity. When I have a physical book, I just remember it better.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And do you get to choose the books that you usually review? Do you get to choose, or are they kind of like assigned to you?
It depends on the outlet. So for book list, the editor just assigns them to me, and she essentially just asks, like, "Are you free to review this book by this date?" And I say yes, and then I get the book. And then I review for a magazine called Forward, and they exclusively review titles from independent presses.
Mm-hmm.
So that one is based on like a here's what's available, you request what you want system. Yeah. And then for Book Riot, I can write about whatever I want.
Yeah, because I can imagine that it's maybe a bit tough for you to get a book that's maybe it's not really your genre, and then you have to kind of go through it and actually read it and finish it, review it.
Yeah, I mean, well, with graphic novels, that does tend to happen because it isn't a singular genre. It is all genres, but all in cartoon form or visual form in some
Yeah.
way. So I said earlier, I once had to review a body horror book that was like a graphic novel book about a lot of body horror and sort of mystical stuff. And ultimately, I do think it was really good, but it's really not for me.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing, but it was a little bit like, ugh, I reached out to the editor and I was like, please, if it's a book about body horror, please just don't send it to me because I'm not the right person.
Yeah, and you're gonna kind of drag the reading and then have a lot of difficulty and maybe unfairness reviewing it.
Yeah. So I read that one. I did give a good review because I thought it was well done. Like, but it took me a while to get there.
Yeah.
So it's just not as like efficient of a process when I have to like drag myself through a book I don't like. You're exactly right.
Do you review exclusively graphic novels or a little bit of everything?
A little bit of everything. I pitched myself to Book List. I was when I emailed them, out of the blue last summer, and I was like, I can review graphic novels because I had a lot of bylines where I had talked about graphic novels, especially on Book Riot, just because I like them. So they said, "Oh, of course." And I basically was playing the like advantage game because I feel like a lot of people are intimidated by the prospect of reviewing graphic novels because they're worried that they have to talk about the art. Which is true. It is hard. You do have to like, look at it and think about like why they're doing it this way and if it adds to the story at all. But, if you have any experience like just looking at things and thinking about them, I think you can talk about art. I don't think it needs to be a rarefied experience. But
And
in general, I
Oh,
will
sorry.
review anything. Oh, it's fine. I'll review anything. I don't have a strong preference for or against any type of book really.
And do you have, yeah, because I think a lot of people kind of also think about graphic novels and they think immediately about comic books, which may not be for everyone. And do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, so graphic novels do have an interesting history. In that, oh, sorry, there's some
It's
sirens.
okay.
This is New York, baby. Yeah, I mean, I took a graphic novels class in college, and we didn't, read any superhero comic books, but like one of the first like major graphic novelists was this man named Will Eisner. There's an award named after him, the Eisner Award, and his graphic novels and stories were really serious. So that was happening in the 50s around the same time as like, the popularity of comic books was really ratcheting up. So it's not that there weren't serious like adult comics like happening at the same time as like superhero comics and kid focused comics, but like the sort of more kid focused properties are the ones that do tend to last longer because those characters are easier to transmute into different situations. I still like reading Peanuts comics and Calvin and Hobbes and like those daily comic strips and stuff. I think they're great. I also I love Art Spiegelman and Alison Bechdel and sort of Marjane Satrapi and like all of the classic writers of the graphic comics genre. There's a lot of amazing work within that genre, that within that art form that you can find that's not just a comic book. And also like people who are worried about it being like targeted to kids, I guess I would just say get over it, because things for kids are fun too. So move on with your life. I don't know.
I have this feeling that a lot of people think that graphic novels cannot be as deep, as profound as a novel. And in the last few years, I've also picked up a few graphic novels. Mostly it started with Hilda. And then I went to other things because I kind of found out as I was searching for more Hilda that there were very deep stories within graphic novels.
Yeah, I would also recommend Tilly Walden. She's a great graphic novelist. Her stories are, she does science fiction stuff and like some stuff that feels like some people also have like hangups about genre fiction, but she tells like such beautiful human stories. I mean, everyone suggests Mouse by Art Spiegelman for good reason, because he's telling the story of his father in a concentration camp in Poland through the graphic medium, because it's such an intense story, and he like it's difficult to process. There's actually a really funny story. This is a fun fact that I love. But so Art Spiegelman, when the first part of Mouse came out in '89, I believe, it was a bestseller, and it was on the New York Times bestseller fiction list. And Art Spiegelman got very angry. And said, like, this isn't fiction. This is my father's story. This is nonfiction. And apparently, like, one of the Times editors was like, well, someone has to go to his apartment, and if a mouse answers the door, then we'll move it to nonfiction.
What? Oh my God.
That
Never heard of that.
Yeah, I just thought it was really funny. And of course, now that's like the comic that everyone's like, if you think graphic novels are just for kids, you got to read Mouse. But there's so many others that you could recommend too.
Do you have any favorites?
Yeah, I really like comics journalism, which is like journalists who go to different places and draw about them. I think it's like an interesting experiment in subjectivity in journalism. So Sarah Glidden is a really popular one. She has a book called Rolling Blackouts about her travels in the Middle East. Joe Sacco is a classic of that genre. So he has two books that I've been recommending a lot recently, Footnotes in Gaza and Palestine. And he also has a book called The Fixer that is a very intense book about the I believe he was in Bosnia and Serbia. That's where he was. So right after the breakup of Yugoslavia, and sort of dealing with all the violence that was going, he was like not dealing with, but he was around all the violence that was happening there at the time. And then I just read Nubia, A Real One by L.L. McKinney. Nubia is a character who is classic to the Wonder Woman canon. This is such a really good take on like the Wonder Woman lore. And then one of my all-time favorite graphic novels is The Diary of a Teenage Girl by Phoebe Gloeckner. It is really intense, so like research it before you get into it. Like it deals with a lot of like complicated topics because she's 15 years old and doing a lot of stuff. So, but I highly recommend it. I think it's a wonderful book.
Very good. Thank you. I will definitely leave all the book recommendations on the show's notes so people can go back to them.
Oh, great. Yeah, I'll email them to you if that
Thank
helps
you.
too.
Thank you. Then I'm sure that I won't forget anything.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about your experience as an English teaching assistant?
Yeah, I thought I wanted to be a teacher for many years. And I think the reason that I thought that was because I was, a kid who was bullied and didn't have a ton of like connections with other kids my age. I had friends, but it was a little bit more like kids are so difficult. So like the people at school who did show me a lot of kindness were teachers. So I was like, oh, okay, well, being a teacher is good. That's what I want to do. And so there's a lot of programs in the States where you can sign up to be like a classroom teacher in public schools or charter schools without necessarily having like a teaching degree, just because there is like a high need for teachers in the US because teachers are severely underpaid in the US. So I was working for this nonprofit that placed like recent graduates as teaching assistants in classrooms around New York City, because a lot of public schools essentially have too many students in each classroom. Like legally, you're not supposed to have more than 36. And that's still a lot for
That's
one
already
teacher
a
to
lot,
handle.
yeah.
Yeah. But then normally it would be more than that, just because they would sort of over enroll classrooms for whatever reason. So I was in a 10th grade English class, and so I had my small group. I like participated in this like girls empowerment club with another teacher where we did a lot of like talking with students, and I did a lot of like helping them write like essays for summer programs too. And also, not saying I didn't only love the high achieving students, like the students who were, you know, there just to pass were also super fun. I really have a lot of love for teaching and teachers, but I sort of realized I couldn't really subject myself to the amount of selflessness I think you need to have to become a teacher in the US, especially because I wasn't really making any money. And so I was living at home, which is fine. I really enjoyed living with my dad that year, but I wanted to explore my life a little bit differently than like just, you know, working 24/7 for the next 3 years. And my friends who are teachers who did make it through grad school and like rocked it out are amazing. And I still love to talk to them about teaching because I think it's, you know, one of the best things you can do. But it didn't work for me. And I'm really glad that I did it, but still.
What about the organization that you volunteer as a mentor, Girls Right Now? Can you tell us more about it, and what is your role in it?
Yeah, so it is an educational organization in that they pair, you know, people that they deem to be like professional in the sort of writing and media world. There's a lot of publishing professionals who volunteer for them as well. We are, you know, called mentors and then paired with high school students, most of whom are girls or non-binary or gender non-conforming. And we sort of mentor them about writing and do work on projects that are submitted to like Girls Right Now and get to like live on the Girls Right Now website. So they get to like present their work and everything. And there's also a lot of opportunities for the mentees to like learn more about like the writing world, like the journalism world, media, the media landscape, publishing world, through workshops with very impressive like professional women and gender nonconforming people in the industry. And actually tonight is the final presentation of my mentees' work. So like sadly it doesn't get to be in person, but so we made a video where I like present. Tonight is the final presentation where I give the introduction and I get to say, this is my mentee, this is her story. And then there's a video of her reading her story. So at least like she gets like some sort of presentation of the fact that she worked really hard this year.
It's a nice way. That's, well, it is the way that it had to be online, but at least they're doing something. At least people are continuing to do things.
Yeah, and I really like, you know, writing exercises, so I'll just turn on like some soothing music in the background and I'll be like, hey, let's just write together. But then I forget that like teenagers, right, especially in America, I don't know if it's the same for you, but teenagers here are like so test and outcome focused that sometimes when I'm like, let's just do a free write, like the like kids I'm like tutoring or working with on writing stuff will be like, but what am I actually gonna write? And I was like, whatever you want. And they're like, what? So you always do have to come in with like a theme just to make things, to get things started and make it a little easier.
To guide them. Otherwise they're kind of lost.
Yeah.
There are a few things that I've read in your bio that I'd like to ask you about. So you say you love theater, cheese. Cheese I found very funny because I live in the Netherlands and it's like the cheese land. You also love Fandom and Edith Piaf. So let's talk about each of these things and let's start with favorites. I would like a favorite type of cheese, a favorite theater play you've seen so far, and a favorite Edith Piaf song.
Amazing. I love this question. My favorite cheese is brie. It's really hard to find good brie in America. So I will be going to France and the Netherlands as soon as it is safe. I also love halloumi, but that is, again, hard to find the good stuff here. You gotta, go to Turkey or something to get the really good stuff. And then, so theater, I've loved like going to plays since I was young. My parents also like early on, took us to plays and stuff on Broadway because like they wanted to see it, and they had 3 daughters that they had to bring too. So instead of paying for a babysitter, I guess. So my favorite play that I've seen recently, I was in Scotland a few years ago and I saw a production of Rhinoceros by Eugene Ionesco. And if you're not familiar with the play Rhinoceros, it is about the rise of fascism in France during World War II. And it's a very incisive commentary on the Vichy regime and like the way that people just sort of accept something very abnormal as normal very quickly. So the plot of the play is that people start turning into rhinoceroses. Yeah, it's a very cogent metaphor if you if you see it, I promise. And then I also saw Angels in America by Tony Kushner, which is a 2-part epic, one of my absolute favorite plays of all time. And then my favorite Edith Piaf song is Hymne à la mort, which is about, her fall in love, Marcel, he was a boxer, I think. And then she financially supported his family after he died, which I thought was so beautiful.
Wow. Did you see the movie with Marion Cotillard?
I don't think I've seen it since I was like 13. So
yeah,
I think I should watch it again. I don't know. I'll turn on Edith Piaf when I like really need an emotional punch. When sometimes you're just like, I want to feel a lot right now.
I'm sad and I want to be sadder.
Yes, exactly. That's what French music is great for.
Yeah, it is. But I don't speak French. I understand a few things, but it's like you don't need to understand it because you really feel it. Like
yeah. I actually did my college like bachelor's thesis about French music and like specifically women in French music.
Wow.
And God, like I love it, like especially the music from like the 50s and 60s. It's just a lot of French singers in the 50s were just, processing the pain of World War II through music, and it's very sad and very beautiful. And you're right, you can just feel the emotions like punching through your headphones, basically.
Yeah, there's something about French music that's sort of like Jacques Brel, and so that it's just so pungent, I think, in a sense. It's impossible for you to listen to that and not feel it.
Yeah, Jacques Brel especially is just like, if you watch videos of him, he committed his entire body to the performance in a way that you just don't see anymore from like singer-songwriters.
No, it's really cool. It's really good. But the movie is, I really liked it as well. I saw it and I think the acting she was, I don't know, so strong as well in a sense, so self-assured. That was really cool.
I'm going to watch that again. I haven't seen it in such a long time.
You also talk that you love fandom. Why do you love it so much?
I found Tumblr like around the end of high school, and I was like, oh my God, I'm like not alone and like loving all this like stuff, because my twin sister and I both discovered Harry Potter when we were very young. And that, although like I have a lot of issues with J.K. Rowling now and don't really subscribe to that like fandom anymore, as a young person, it was a really great way to feel like you were like part of a secret club.
Yes.
And then I also read like a lot of Spider-Man comics when I was younger. And this was like before the comic book movie industry was so big. So it was sort of like, it was a little bit weird for like a young girl to be reading Spider-Man to other people. To me, it was normal. To everyone else, I was the weirdo. But so there were so many like books and, bands, and there's a lot of like band fandom that was very funny when I was a kid. There was a lot of stuff that I liked that I felt like I was alone in liking. So when I sort of found like that there's communities online of people who also love this stuff and talk about it all the time, I did feel a lot less alone. And then now, like as an adult, I like to read fan fiction and like watch, really long YouTube videos of like people talking about like weird fandom drama from the 2000s. I like that stuff. But it's still like it was just a great place to like feel like oh, everyone else likes this too, amazing, you know.
Yeah, because I do feel like Tumblr was such a source of joy for so many people.
Yeah.
And so much about fan fiction started that. I was also part of Fandom, Sherlock in this case.
I was a part
And
of the Sherlock fandom too.
completely insane, all of us. But
Yeah,
but
I am proud of us. We really took
yeah,
that show and ran with it. You know,
like it was,
Doctor Who too. No one watched
yes,
Doctor Who except for like me and my 3 friends, and then we're like,
yes.
oh my god, other people like this too. I remember when you could not find Doctor Who on American television, and I was just like stalking all these forums trying to find like links to watch the show.
Yeah, and like you said, exactly as you said, you finally find a place where you can express how you feel towards other people that express it in the same way. So we can all just shout at each other about the
I
things we
also
love.
Yeah, I also think the effusive energy of love that I had for so many things was a little off-putting to people. Like
Yes.
I like
Yeah.
loving things loudly was not very popular when I was a teenager. Now it seems like that's not as much the case for today's teens. But yeah, I was made fun of a lot for like, you know, being a little bit too much about some of the things that I loved. So then when I found Fandom and I was like, "Oh my god, everybody's too much. Amazing."
Yeah, it's just really great. And especially because through some fandoms you find other fandoms. I became a
Mhm.
fan of BBC radio drama through Sherlock because of
Yeah.
Benedict Cumberbatch, because he was in Cabin Pressure.
Mhm.
And to be honest, I think at some point Cabin Pressure became so as important as Sherlock.
I remember that. Yeah. And it
Uh,
was, yeah, I mean, it was great. So I was
yeah,
happy.
it
I
is
was
really
happy to find
great.
it.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it's just so funny how these things works. It was in a way the reason why I started listening to audiobooks. So I'm forever grateful for that.
Oh, that's awesome.
So to find someone who kind of feels the same about fandom, and this is why I also wanted to talk to you about, because fan fiction, I wrote so much fan fiction when I couldn't write.
Yeah. I wrote it too. And like, I have a lot like on my computer that I just never posted, but I'll
Yeah.
go back and read it. And I love that to me, that's more of a diary than like a journal, than
Hmm.
keeping a diary, because it shows so much like the way that I was thinking at the time and like how I wanted like stories to like unfold, because I would write fan fiction
Yeah.
about them, you know?
Don't you find also fan fiction comforting? Because sometimes you want to write something and you don't know what, but then you already have the characters and the world, and you just
Yeah.
kind of have figured them out.
That's exactly what it is. I find it so comforting, and I find reading it so comforting
Yeah.
too. And it is just, I mean, one of my favorite books of all time is Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell.
Yeah.
And like, I really connected. Like, yeah, I would love to just like sort of play around in a magical world or sci-fi world, you know, forever, than have to continue to engage with real life sometimes, because being an adult is hard, and sometimes it is just nice to like go back to the things that I loved when I was younger, or the things that I love now that people are writing fan fiction about.
Yeah. And are you still active in any fandoms at the moment?
The temperature is a little bit high on fandom these days. It's a lot of like people getting really angry at each other, a lot of people talking past each other. And I understand, because it's a hard time, and there's a lot of like tough conversations that people want to have about storytelling and representation. I think that's like oddly led to a lot of people just attacking each other personally, that I think is not very productive. I'm active in as much that when I like a fan fiction, I'm gonna leave a nice comment, or when I watch like a video of like Sarah Zed talking about like the Sherlock fandom, I'll like it, you know, leave the thumbs up on YouTube.
Yeah.
But I needed a little bit of emotional distance from like the super active, like constantly online fandom, because it's a lot,
Yeah.
and a lot of people are angry and hurting. One of the podcasts that I like the best is called Buffering the Vampire Slayer,
Yeah.
and they do an episode by episode breakdown of Buffy. And Buffy is a show that means a lot to a lot of people, with a very sort of problematic creator attached to it.
Yeah.
So, and that's been known for many, many years at this point. So I think that the way that the podcast like really responsibly dives into like, these are some of the problems we have with this show, and like, this is why we still love it, basically. I think that's a great way to like talk through fandom stuff. So that's been really impressive to me recently, because right now they're doing season 6 of Buffy, which is about like trauma and addiction and abuse and like all these like really sad, intense topics. And they're still like able to like kind of have fun with the fun parts and also treat the serious parts seriously.
Oh, wow.
So, but Buffy and the Vampire Slayer, if you love Buffy, listen to that podcast.
I've actually never watched Buffy except for maybe a little bit on TV in Portugal when I was still like a child, so I never really get into it. But I hear a lot of people of course, talking about the problems as well, and I think that's how it kind of came back to the social media that I consume. Talking about the problematics, but a lot of people also watching it for the first time and still finding the value in it, while also figuring out, okay, this is problematic. Maybe not at the time, people would not see it, but nowadays, like with what we know, yeah.
I mean, the cool thing about Buffy is that there's so much like academic writing about it. So we actually have a record of like academics who like thought that the show's treatment of race wasn't okay at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I did watch it when I was so young. So there's some people who are like, oh, should I watch it now? And I'm always like, I don't know. Like, I loved it because I started watching it when I was 11, and I never really seen like a girl who fought and was also treated like as a friend and a complicated person, and all these other, she had a lot going on. In addition to being like a girl who fights vampires and demons. And that meant a lot to me when I was a kid. But if I watched it like now, I don't know. I watched it when I did, so I can't really like say how I would react now.
Yeah, of course. But it's also curious that you talk about this awareness, because I do remember that Tumblr was my source of learning about a lot of social justice. Like basically all of the social justice that I talk about now and that I'm aware now stems from my time at Tumblr, because Tumblr can be quite harsh. Like people can be quite harsh to people who are not informed. But on the other hand, if you are open to learn, you will learn a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you can find a lot of like, but it's also unlike Twitter. There aren't caps on how long you can make stuff. So like, I've read some really like thoughtful, analysis of like the current state of literary criticism on Tumblr. Some really like wonderful analysis of like, why is it still important to like read books in English class, like, because everyone is like, oh, we'll never have to identify like a metaphor in real life. And it's like, sure, but if you take like a reading, a humanities class, and you're taught to read with a critical eye and assess a piece of work, you are less likely to fall victim to propaganda. Like that is just it. You're taught to be like a more responsible reader. And so I like that on Tumblr, people are like, hey, everyone should like be more responsible in the way that they read and consume media. And by responsible, they don't mean call everything problematic and walk away from it. They say, if you like something, that's great, and continue to like it. Here's a way to engage with it that could be potentially like really fruitful for you.
Yeah. That will teach you more, of course. And I think the fact that there are so many minorities there, I also think it helps a lot. So it can be a bit harsh, but if you know how to deal with, okay, I don't know everything, and I should first listen before I actually say, like, have an uninformed opinion, I find it very valuable.
Yeah. I mean, I was lucky enough, like the, sort of, neighborhood I grew up in, there were, people of different backgrounds. And like, I had some friends were from like two mom families or two dad families too, which wasn't as common, back in the crazy early 2000s. But yeah, I mean, when I went to college, I went to college in Chicago, which as an American city has a lot of problems with race and the way that like especially the city treats its Black and brown residents. so you couldn't ignore it there. Or you could, but I didn't. And neither did like the people that I was friends with, because it's just so obvious, the class differences and the way that we're treated differently. And so like that also, taking a lot of classes about like, gender and critical race theory at the time, and being on Tumblr, I was just like, oh God, yeah. I thought things were fine when I was growing up, but now I realize they're not that fine,
No, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I don't know if you want to talk about this or not, but also like the take on fanfiction that has been on Twitter, like people discussing what does it mean when someone says this reads like fanfiction.
So it is funny because like I think a lot of people are misusing that, but like if they mean that it's self-indulgent, it's the writer's right to be self-indulgent. Like I don't, if I read like a book that I'm like, this seems a little bit like a fantasy that the author had, that's fine with me. Good for them. They got paid for their fantasy, right?
Yeah.
But so when something like reads like fan fiction, to me, it's more that there's like chapters that seem like placeholders, because sometimes when a fan fiction like has a devoted following and it's updating, sometimes the writer will just like do like a short chapter to like appease their readers before like they get to the big chapter. So sometimes like serialized fiction can read like in a little bit of an odd way, but I don't think that's what people mean when they say this reads like fan fiction. I think they're saying this reads like someone's fantasy and I don't like it.
I actually interpret it as people saying basically this is not well written. So it's very nice to see your perspective, because I never thought about that.
Yeah, no, you're totally right, because they mean it as an insult. You're right. They just mean it as an insult, and I like went really deep. Yeah.
No, but maybe
I've
some
read
people
so many amazing fan fictions.
Yeah.
Though. I've read fan fictions that I'm like that I've like cried that I like couldn't find them because the author must have deleted them or something. But yeah, and I've also to be totally honest, I've like read some books that I read as fan fictions originally, and then they were edited into like wonderful books. So, that happens.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to call out anybody because people are like weird about that, but like fan fiction is just a way to practice your writing. It's not bad.
No. Yeah, there are so many good well-written fan fiction out there as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know, it just feels rude because what people are saying is I didn't read fan fiction, so I think it's bad. And it's like, okay, well, you didn't read it, so you don't know, actually.
Exactly. Maybe you should give it a try and you'll like it.
Yeah.
Because you can choose whatever. Like the great thing about fanfiction is you can choose what you feel like reading, search for the tags if you want to cry or not, and it's perfect. Because a lot of anxiety, the anxiety that comes sometimes with reading, is not knowing what's going to happen. And of course, you don't know what's going to happen, but you know who are the couples, and you know if it's like a happy thing and which trigger warnings are there.
Yeah. I think it's also like, it is the same as sort of trying to pick a book for like someone who doesn't read very often. You're like, well, what do you like to read? And they're like, I don't know. And I'm like, okay. But so if someone's like, I tried reading fan fiction once and I hated it. And I'm like, well, what did you read about? They're like, I don't know. I like read this random Glee fan fiction and I don't even watch Glee. And I'm like, well, of course you didn't like it. Like,
it's not for you.
If you really like the show Madam Secretary, you should read some Madam Secretary fan fiction. Like, just, like actually do a little bit of research before you say something's bad, know?
You mentioned that when you finished college, there was a moment of transition of learning to go from heavy academic texts to more fun books. Would you like to talk more about that?
So after college and graduate school, I had a bit of difficulty getting back into reading for fun again, because so much of my reading had been targeted towards like academic output for, 4 years. And then for grad school, it was 2 years. And so it started to feel like if I wasn't reading something that I could like integrate into an argument, I was wasting my time. And I didn't like feeling that way, because I love to read, and I love to read especially books that are frivolous. It took a while to feel like reading was like good for me again, because I was like, oh, I'd had to do so much like reading of like critical theory and stuff to like write these like final theses that I did, then I was like, do I even want to read? And then after college, I reread a bunch of Gail Carson Levine books, and I started to feel good again. And then after grad school, the book series that made me feel like, oh, reading is good, and like I should just read books for fun was actually the To All the Boys I've Loved Before series by Jenny Han.
Yes.
Those books are so sweet. I'd heard about them for a while, and then of course the movie came out, and I was like, oh, I should finally sit down and read these books. And I was like, oh, these are so fun. I should just read for fun again.
That is so curious, because most people talk about feeling that they don't have time, of course, with college to read because for fun, because everything that they read at college is for college. So you basically stopped reading for fun with all the workload at college?
Yeah, I just didn't really have the like time or brain space. And I am also like a kind of slow reader, so with the amount of like reading assignments that I had in college, it was a little bit difficult to like really, push myself to read for fun, like to calm down in that way. So because I spent so much time on the readings for class, because some people can read really quickly and I just can't. So
No, I understand that. And what about the other way around? Like when you had to go from reading for fun to reading for college, was it very difficult, that transition?
I mean, it wasn't as hard from like high school to college because I was like used to that basically. But when I went back to graduate school, it was a bit of a transition. But like one of the nice things about the graduate program that I went to is that we started by reading a lot of Karl Marx, and I had read a lot of Karl Marx in college, so it wasn't very difficult for me to get back in the mindset. Like if you haven't read Marx before, he's very complicated. He's very wordy. So like reading him more than once is always a good idea. If you want to, you don't have to. But so I did, and I thought it was a good decision for me. But that was like a nice way to be like, here's something you've read before, so you don't have to start with something super complicated. Yeah.
How about now? How do you conciliate reading for fun, reading for work, or reviewing and etc.?
I do like a lot of the books that I read to review. So that has been good. I do often think when I'm reading like a fun fiction book, I'm like, oh, can I turn this like into content for Book Riot maybe? But one thing I never really write about is like just straight nonfiction books. So I've been reading some more nonfiction recently, and that's been helping me like have time when I'm just reading, as opposed to like reading with writing about it in the future in mind. So I'm reading How to Do Nothing by Jenny Odell right now.
Yeah.
Which is a book. Have you read it?
No, but I've actually, there is like this expression in Dutch called niksen, which basically translates to do nothing. It's basically a verb, but it means to do nothing, which a lot of people think doing nothing is just watching TV or, just do nothing as in nothing productive. Yeah, but there are a few books about this niksen, and including that one, because I also had it in my hands in some bookstore, when it's really do nothing.
Yeah, it's very hard, but like it's a great book for sort of thinking about all of our relationships to like capitalism and productivity. So that's a good book to just read and not write about. And then I have a book about Scotland that I've been wanting. I love Scotland. I went there once a few years ago. I think it's just such a nice, beautiful country. I haven't traveled a whole lot, so I'm hoping to change that in the future.
Whenever possible.
Yes, in a responsible fashion. Maybe in like a year.
Yeah, when everyone is vaccinated, or everyone that can be vaccinated anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
What about audiobooks? Is that something you still listen to?
Once in a while, I still listen to audiobooks, definitely on like long journeys. I haven't been on a long flight in a really long time. But yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I love so much about the audiobooks when I was younger is that it was like, it was these character actors who would read them, and it really just made them come alive. So I was listening to Pride and Prejudice as read by Rosamund Pike.
Oh yeah.
She played
Gone
Jane.
Girl, right? As well.
Yeah.
Oh
and
yeah,
she,
of course. Of course, sorry. I'm kind of picking another book and movie when there's of course she is in
Yeah, but she's definitely better known for Gone Girl.
Yeah.
So that's okay. So I was reading that and it's really good. I mean, Audible just has been really pushing that whole like celebrities read books,
Yeah.
to you thing. I think I'll try to dive in and see if there are more that I like, but I also kind of like it when it's sort of an unknown character actor or something. I think I keep saying I'm going to listen to Michelle Obama's. For years, I've been saying I'm going to listen to Michelle Obama's book. My dad I think he's currently making his way through Barack Obama's book on audio. But yeah, I mean, so many like famous people read their own books now that I feel like that's an easier way to engage with, because if you're like reading a book by a comedian, like you'd want to, hear their affect and how they wrote it. So I should dive in. I don't really listen to audiobooks that much. That was a very long way of me saying that, that I should get back into it.
Yeah, it's because you talked about nonfiction. And I used to use audiobooks for nonfiction because I cannot read nonfiction.
Oh yeah,
but I can listen to it. And yeah, the biography of memoir of Michelle Obama is really good. I haven't heard the one from Barack Obama because it's 20 hours long. It's daunting.
He is not a brief speaker or writer. Like that's very common from him. He talks a lot.
And I kind of read the other day that it was like the first part or something. I don't think it's the end of it.
It's not. So my dad finished it semi recently. So it ends when they killed Osama bin Laden when he directed the Navy SEAL team, and so then the next book is going to be his second term. Yeah, and I have a feeling he wrote them in two parts because he didn't know how the 2020 election was going to turn out.
Okay, so kind of wait up a bit.
Yeah. So and. Reflecting on his legacy from the place of Joe Biden being president, I think is a little easier. So I'm assuming that the second book will be equally uplifting as opposed to depressing.
Yeah, because I have no idea how the first one is. But but like I said, I really wanted to listen to it. But again, 20 hours and that I can fit so many other audiobooks in that.
Yeah, no, I think I'm going to go back and like listen to, see if I can find some like more Jane Austen books on audio because that's always fun. And then like Georgette Heyer, like some vintage authors
and classics, because that's also a good way to go through classics. I think when sometimes it's difficult to listen or to read, in this case it's always nice to go with the audiobook. So for the last question of the podcast, I would like to know an all-time favorite book and a book you would recommend right now.
One of my all-time favorite books is called Eat Up by Ruby Tandoh. And you might recognize Ruby Tandoh from the series of The Great British Baking Show that she did.
I don't follow it. I've heard a lot about it, so I have an idea of what it is, but I do not follow it.
Yeah, so to your listeners who know, she was in the season that Frances won. I think that was series 4. So her book, Eat Up, is all about sort of reconnecting with like the pleasure of food, and not in a way of like you only can eat healthy to feel pleasure around food. It's cravings happen and you should honor them. And it's a really great read for like thinking about food as something like that is, both sustaining and pleasurable. And also like accepting that your eating schedule isn't going to look like a wellness influencer. It's going to look like a real person.
Yeah.
And there's some really great recipes in there too. So like vegan and vegetarian and everything. And then a book that I would recommend right now is, I always tell everyone to like just read something by Carrie Fisher, because like, even if you like don't like Star Wars, haven't seen them, she's such a great writer and she's such an interesting figure in Hollywood. So like her book, The Princess Diarist, is just fascinating. And Postcards from the Edge is great. Like all of her books are just wonderful.
She's just funny. I think I've read one or two by her. I distinctively remember the one where I think she just wrote it to tell the world that she had shagged Harrison Ford, which I mean, wow. Girl.
So that's The Princess Diarist, and like that is such an interesting relationship, and it was such a fascinating time in Hollywood, because she was like, she wrote about how like literally every actor in Hollywood read for Star Wars, and then like these are the people they ended up with, you know, like it could have been anybody. So I love that book. So I always recommend that as like, it's a really cool book, and she's a great writer, and you will laugh out loud.
And she's very honest. She really like the things that she told there. I was like, wow, I would never. It was just so open and so personal. It's really good.
Yeah, she's great at just like showing how she feels too about everything.
Sorry, the helicopter is still going around. I don't know what they're searching for. I hope it's not me. No, I'm kidding.
That would be crazy.
No, I didn't do anything. Julia, thank you so much for coming to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.
It was really fun talking to you. Thank you. You can access today's show's notes via my pod page, which you can find along with all of my social media links at linktree/Karina Pereira. In there, you'll also find a link to a Story of Sorts playlist available on Libro FM containing the audiobooks recommended by our guests, which will be updated as the show progresses. If you'd like to give Libro FM a try, you can use the code A Story of Sorts at checkout to get 2 books for the price of 1. This offer is valid for new Libro FM members in the US and Canada. Libro FM is an audiobook platform which allows you to buy audiobooks directly from an indie bookstore. Check them out. If you have enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting A Story of Sorts on Patreon. Patreon is a platform which allows you to contribute monthly to the podcast in exchange for extra content, such as early access to episodes, a shout-out at the end of an episode and on Instagram, and choosing a theme for me to talk about on the podcast. You can become a patron at patreon.com/A Story of Sorts. I'd also be very grateful if you would simply leave a review and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. I will be back in 2 weeks with a new interview, but before that, you can count on another bonus episode with the books I have read in May, which I am planning to be out next Tuesday. I'll talk to you then, and thank you for listening.